Once upon a time, there was a world when there was no COVID-19. It was a magical era before anyone knew what an N95 mask was or the president told people to drink bleach. Yes, it was a different time indeed, but bad things still happened. Hurricanes and tornadoes, wildfires and floods, blizzards and earthquakes still ravaged the land. But not only the land, people too, their homes, their livelihoods. And when disaster strikes, Greg, who do people turn to?
Ghostbusters? Do they turn to Ghostbusters?
Sometimes. No, but I think maybe small businesses. If we're talking about small businesses, especially, I think at least in the pre-pandemic era, many people didn't know where to turn to when disaster would strike.
Sure.
For example, I don't really know how well known the Small Business Administration was, or even if people knew what things like disaster loan assistance was. But yeah, that's something that the SBA has done for a long time. And they made loans to people and to businesses who had suffered substantial economic injury. So anyway, when disaster strikes, government money tries to come to the rescue.
Yeah.
And we're going to discuss one program in particular in this episode, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, aka EIDL.
That's right, Caleb. This is American Idol fraud.
If you'd like to earn CPE credit for listening to this episode, visit earmarkcpe.com. Download the app, take a short quiz, and get your CPE certificate. Continuing education has never been so easy. And now, on to the episode.
This is Oh My Fraud, a true crime podcast where instead of obsessing over serial killers, we razz petty swindlers. I'm Caleb Newquist.
And I'm Greg Kyte.
Greg, should we read a recent review?
I would love to read a recent review. Do you have one at hand?
I do. I have one
Nice.
at hand.
Awesome.
It's from a few months ago, but it's perfectly fine. It's from Smokin' Idahoan, who gave us 5 stars and wrote, quote, entertaining and informative, plus you can earn CPEs, 1000x better than webinars or self-study. Highly recommend.
Nice. That's awesome. Thanks, Smokin' Idahoan.
And for anyone else out there, please rate the show and leave us a review, and one of us will read it on a future episode. Greg, do you have any memories of natural disasters growing up?
I do, as a matter of fact. And it's kind of a funny memory because even at my advanced age, I very specifically remember the morning of Sunday, May 18th, 1980, because that is the day that Mount St. Helens blew in southwestern Washington State. Yeah.
Big one.
So it was just days before my 8th birthday. And it's so funny because what I remember, I don't remember the explosion of the eruption. What I remember is my mom rushing into me and my brother's room and going, "Oh my gosh, is everybody okay?" Because me and my brother totally slept through it.
Slept through the whole thing.
Yeah, we had no idea why. But then obviously, like at school, we're watching the news. It was a big damn deal. What had happened. But yeah, so obviously it woke my mom up and freaked the hell out of her. She said that because she was shocked that we did not wake up with it, because she said this is her quote that I remember again from when I was 8. She said it sounded like a boulder fell through our carport because you think about it, like the corrugated metal of a carport and a big ass boulder that paints a good picture. Also, we were some of the fancy people in Mount Lake Terrace, Washington, because we had a carport. But here's the crazy thing about it, like what my mom said and how bad it freaked her out. We lived like well over 100 miles away from where Mount St. Helens was. I think I was trying to look it up on Google maps, and they only so I wasn't able to figure out like crow flies miles, because obviously sound wouldn't take the interstate to get to us. But yeah, one way or another, we're over 100 miles away from it. It still sounded like a boulder crashing through our carport.
That is a good one.
Yeah,
I wondered if you were going to bring that up because it occurred to me. It's like because you grew up in Washington.
Yeah, exactly.
But anyway,
do you have any? I'm assuming, because again, I know where you grew up, so I assume that you have disasters. And my guess, I have a very specific disaster in mind as to what your natural disasters are where you lived.
Oh, you do? Oh,
yes.
Okay, so yeah, most people that listen to the show know, but I grew up in Nebraska. On the Great Plains.
Yep.
And I have countless memories from my youth of tornadoes.
Oh, like tornado, like getting because what, they got like sirens, like just hearing sirens, or actual tornadoes touching down in your city?
Whatever. I mean, so it bears some explanation. Yes, we had whistles. I lived in a small town, and people who grew up in small towns know that, like, when there's emergencies, like whistles blow, right? And so they would blow whistles for tornado watches and tornado warnings, probably mostly for tornado warnings. I don't know if they blew them for watches.
Okay.
But where I lived in Nebraska, we were located in Valley County, and guess where it got its name? And so
was it like on the top of a hill?
Yeah, you got it.
Nice.
Anyway, because we were in a valley, it was difficult for the tornadoes to actually reach the town. It was harder for them to touch down in those areas.
Okay.
But there was the conditions for tornadoes was like every summer, multiple times a summer, the lots of severe weather. And so like tornado watches, they're a dime a dozen. So on June 3rd, 1980, 7 tornadoes touched down in or near Grand Island, Nebraska, and killed 5 people and injured 200.
Oh, shit.
And so quite the thing. So tornadoes are definitely like, it's kind of in my psyche at all times. But what's weird is I talk to some people, and some people are just terrified of tornadoes.
Yeah.
And like when I think about them, I don't really think about the fear is not something I experience. It is like wholesome living is what I kind of
right.
Like
that's like eating a fresh
nostalgia.
apple while chewing on a stalk of grass in the back of your grandpa's
it's
truck.
It's kind of nostalgic and romantic.
So natural disasters, here's another crazy thing, not that I've experienced, but I just and again, not a humble brag, this is a full-on cocky brag. I just closed on buying a condo on the Big Island of Hawaii.
Oh, nice.
So I now own a vacation home in Hawaii, which is very cool.
In proximity of an active volcano.
Exactly. Exactly.
Nice. You can't escape it, Greg. In paradise, though.
Right. Worth it.
So, historically, economic injury disaster loans, EIDL, if you remember.
Yes.
They've been for small businesses, small agricultural cooperatives, and most private nonprofit organizations.
Okay. That makes sense.
What does small mean? The best that I can...
I love that you say that, because it has to be, since all this stuff is like government programs, it's all well-defined exactly what's small, but also the level of detail they get into with their definitions of small can give you a brain freeze.
Yeah. So let me just preemptively state that there's a lot of accountants in our audience, and if we get something wrong, they're going to scream at their mobile device,
right,
or wherever they get their podcasts. And so if we get something wrong, just gently correct us in an email or something, and we will be fine.
Yeah.
But
we know you're smarter than us. It's okay. Yes. We're fine.
Yeah. But so we are going to say some things, and like some of these details I think we got most of it right, but if we didn't,
Yeah.
just let us know. Okay.
And,
Not a big
and generally, because we're not a tax podcast and we're not a governmental compliance podcast, a lot of it's just oversimplification for the sake of time.
Right.
Yeah.
So small. What does small mean? Because my friend Greg is correct. These government programs tend to define literally everything. And so in this case, to the best that I could find, small generally means a business with fewer than 500 employees, which many people would say that's not a small business. But,
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
But for the purposes of many of these programs, including EIDL, it is. Okay. So that's number one. Number two, what about substantial economic injury? What does that mean?
Again, seems more nebulous, but also seems like the government's going to try to lock that shit down.
Right. So according to the Small Business Administration's website, that is when a, quote, business is unable to meet its obligations and pay its ordinary and necessary operating expenses.
That sounds nebulous and doesn't sound like they really locked that down.
Right.
A lot of subjectivity to that definition.
Right. A few more details. The SBA can provide an EIDL for up to $2 million at an interest rate no greater than 4% a year, and for a term up to 30 years, depending on the borrower's ability to repay the loan.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Tracking, Greg?
I'm right. I'm right there with you. This is bringing back a lot of the PTSD from the pandemic days. So yes,
fantastic.
I'm there with you.
It's the PTSD we all share.
Right.
A few more important details. EIDL assistance is available only to small businesses when SBA determines they are unable to obtain credit elsewhere.
Gotcha. You're out of credit, so we'll step in. I get you. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. A business may qualify for both an EIDL and a physical disaster loan. So that's another program that the SBA does.
Okay.
The maximum combined loan is the $2 million.
Still $2 million. Gotcha. Now, here's one other thing that I believe, well, not that I believe, that I know happened at least with the COVID-19 pandemic EIDL loans, is that they all they loaned the money during the pandemic, but they didn't require repayment of the loan until I think it was either 12 or 24 months after you actually got the money. So there also, it seems like another aspect of this is there could be deferment of your payment initially, at least until I guess the SBA determined that the disaster was over.
Yeah. That sounds familiar to me. I don't remember the exact details, but I do.
Yeah,
I
know that happened. Again, I can't remember if it was 12 or 24 months, but I do know that happened with COVID-19 EIDL loans.
Okay. Now, there is one more important thing that needs defined here, Greg. Do you know what it is?
Uh-huh.
We don't know what a disaster is.
Oh, right. Yeah, it makes sense.
Right. So we have to define a disaster. Okay. So what constitutes a disaster?
Because you have to have substantial economic injury. So we had to define that. But that injury had to come from a disaster. So I guess you have to define what a disaster is.
Disaster has to be defined. For disaster loans, that means you have to have been impacted by a federally declared disaster. So the let's just say that if you have doubts about the government, then what the government decides is a federally declared disaster is probably not giving you much comfort. Do you know what I'm saying?
Oh, really? Why do you think they're too? Because I did look at the SBA's list of the currently declared disasters on their website. I did look, and it looked like there was lots. There was probably 24 just in this year so far.
Right. And I guess all I'm getting at is if you're more conservative, if you fall on that end of the political spectrum, then you're probably kind of cynical about what the government says and doesn't say is a disaster. That's what I was getting at.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay.
But
I get what you're saying.
It's your point,
it's like, oh, you stubbed your toe. It's a disaster.
It's a disaster.
Here's $2 million.
Right. But to your point, yes, the SBA, it's very easy to find there is a page for federally declared disasters, and it's very long, and it has the cause and
very long,
and when it started, when it was officially declared. Anyway, as you might expect, when the COVID-19 pandemic struck, it was a big fucking disaster.
Right. Although, to your point, not really. I mean, it's not a disaster like, I mean, when we talked about disasters, we weren't talking, none of us brought up, we both brought up disasters that happened in the 1980s. None of us said that, talked about AIDS as being a disaster.
Right.
So the whole idea of of a pandemic, of
a public health crisis,
a public health crisis being a disaster. Exactly. That seems outside of the box, but also makes sense.
Yeah. And so during this particular disaster, a lot more people started learning about economic injury disaster loans very quickly because all 50 states were declared eligible for disaster assistance during the pandemic.
Because of the unprecedented nature of the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of changes were made to the EIDL program so that more businesses could access the funds, and so that those funds could be accessed more quickly. So for starters, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, we knew that as the CARES Act, that passed in March 2020. That attributed $10 billion in funds to the EIDL program. Also, the CARES Act allowed businesses applying for EIDL loans to obtain a $10,000 advance within 3 days of their application being received, and that $10,000 advance was treated like a grant. So it meant that it's just like, you're in trouble, here's some money, you don't have to repay it, it's a grant. We're granting you this money. So just don't die on us. Here again, it's emergency cash for emergency needs.
Yep.
Makes total sense to me. The only catch was, with that advance, it had to be used on payroll, rent, or mortgage payments, or increased cost of materials or supplies, or for other obligations that couldn't be met due to a loss in revenue. So we all remember this pretty clearly. That's very similar to the requirements that they had for PPP loans and what those funds could be spent on. But yeah, so like we said, payroll, rent, mortgage, and increased costs, which I'm glad that was part of it, because I didn't expect the supply chain issues and the scramble for different materials during that time. So that seemed like a very prescient thing for them to include in that. Now, some people probably don't remember this, but in those early heady days of the pandemic, all of the emergency funds allocated to programs like PPP and like EIDL, they all ran out.
Do you remember that?
I do remember that.
I remember it. Yeah.
I remember that. Well, the main thing that I remember was because I did apply for a PPP loan for the two businesses that I run. And the main thing I remember is everybody saying the money can and likely will run out. So get your application in as soon as you possibly can, so that you're not left out in the cold. So I made sure I was as front of the line as I could with getting my stuff put in. And we fortunately did get PPP dollars in the first round, which was great. But yeah, like, they did run out. They did indeed run out, and there was countless desperate businesses that didn't get any of the aid that they desperately needed during that time.
Yep.
For instance, just as an example, the Paycheck Protection Program had $349 billion when it first opened its floodgates of financial relief to the people on April 3rd of 2020, and it ran out exactly 13 days later on April 16th, 2020. So yeah, the money was desperately needed and got gobbled up quickly.
That's nuts to me. That, by the way, that is just like, we're over 3 years removed from that now.
Yeah.
And like the idea that much money was it all got sent out.
Yeah.
Is bananas to me.
Right. Well, and maybe this is maybe I'm putting this out there too soon in the podcast, but we did talk about this on our PPP episode, where I'm struck with the fact that the government is in a rock and a hard place in situations like this, where they can either get the money out fast to help people, but then they're gonna get raked over the coals for the fact that it was too sloppy how they did it. But you can't be fast and not be sloppy, or you can roll it out in a much more systematic way, much more careful way, but then it's going to go a whole lot slower, and you're not going to be able to help the people who really need the help. So very much a rock and a hard place. And I would say, from my snowflake position that I live in, I'm happy that they got the stuff out quickly to the people who needed it. That's my personal opinion. But that was the PPP money. But EIDL, wasn't exactly the same program. And fortunately, EIDL and its accompanying grant programs that we just talked about, they were replenished by the Paycheck Protection Program and by the Healthcare Enhancement Act, which passed in April 2020, which added another $10 billion for the advances, those grants, and another $50 billion for the actual EIDL loans. So there was money that kept getting and we know that the PPP loans also got refreshed. So there was a constant spigot of money that was being put into these things. And with all this, as you might expect, and as I alluded to, and as we saw with the Paycheck Protection Program on prior podcasts, so much money sloshing around, specifically in the EIDL program, it attracted the attention of a lot of people who had less than the best intentions with what they could do with a shit ton of government handouts.
Let's start with some stats. According to a report dated April 28th, 2022, the Small Business Administration approved over 3.9 million loans for a total of $378 billion.
Wait. Are you talking 3.9 million EIDL loans, or is that EIDL plus PPP?
No, that's EIDL. The report,
wow.
It's in the show notes. It's the most recent report I could find from the SBA.
Okay.
So I know we jumped ahead because you were just talking about a minute ago, the replenishment of EIDL for $50 billion.
Yeah.
I don't recall all the steps along the way where like funds were replenished or whatever, but that SBA report is in the show notes. The numbers, they're like on the second or third page. It's all there. Those are the EIDL figures.
Gotcha.
Okay?
But they're eye-popping.
They are
3.9 million EIDL loans.
Mm-hmm.
That's a crazy number of loans.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I had a hard time finding a more recent number. So if anyone knows of a more recent, more accurate number that's been reported, please let us know.
We'd love to hear it.
Yeah, we'd love to hear it. So that report I just mentioned was issued in 2022. However, there were signs of trouble in this program long before that. The SBA's Inspector General, its internal audit department, if you will, they issued a report in October of 2020. So we're just like things are just starting to get interesting in October of 2020.
Yeah. Because I mean, basically 6 months into the pandemic, the SBA is already going, we're having some troubles here with the old EIDL program. Yeah. Wow.
So here's what that report said. Again, in the show notes. I'm quoting now. As of July 31st, 2020, SBA had received over 14 million COVID-19 EIDL applications, of which it approved 3.2 million for a total of $169.3 billion. Additionally, SBA has dispersed 5.8 million emergency advance grants for $20 billion. So we're talking about $190 billion in July of 2020. And I did some very simple math. And because Greg is a former middle school math teacher, he's going to keep me honest. That approval rate is basically 23%. So 3.2 million loans, 14 million applications.
Yeah. Okay.
That
makes
about
sense.
23%.
Yeah.
Not great.
No, well,
great. More than 3/4 of the people who are applying are not getting any aid at all.
Right. But again, so I hear what you're saying, but also it does mean that they're not just handing checks to everybody.
Fair enough. Yeah.
So
True. And also, if you are, keeping score at home, if you average the 3.2 million loans, 169 billion in proceeds, average loan size of about $53,000.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Okay.
For some reason, that feels about right. Because we're talking small businesses. Like Verizon isn't getting an EIDL loan.
Certainly not. And again, just for those people scoring at home, for the advances, 5.8 million advances, $20 billion, average advance, about $3,500, which is weird because they were granting people 10 grand.
Yeah.
So that, I don't know. I'm kind of like, whatever.
Yeah. And again, here's the thing. We talked about this a little bit before we started recording. The requirements, the different, all of the stuff. That's why there's the PTSD involved with all this stuff, because they would say, "Oh, hey, you just apply for it, and we'll just cut you a check right away for $10,000." But then they're like, "Oh, wait, but then you have to do this math because you might not qualify for all 10,000." And later they're like, "Oh, we're just gonna give everybody." I don't remember all the math, but that's how everything felt. Where it's like, "Here's the rules today," and then tomorrow's like, "Oh, we decided to change them a little bit," and then the next day it's like, "Oh, we're back to it because that was too much of a pain in the ass," and all this stuff. So yeah, the whole idea that they were all $10,000, but the math doesn't work out. It's like, yeah, that's because everything was in constant flux every goddamn day of the pandemic.
Yeah. So in that same Inspector General report, I'm quoting again, but there's more stuff that is not going to make you feel great. So here we go. Quote, based on our analysis of SBA's COVID-19 EIDL data as of July 31st, 2020, we found SBA approved $14.3 billion, $13.4 billion dispersed in COVID EIDLs to accounts that differed from the original bank accounts listed on the loan applications.
Okay.
Not great, probably, right?
Right. Well, yes, and I mean it would seem that I could see that being a red flag. I could see why that might happen in real life though too.
Sure. Okay. Fair enough. I'll continue. 62.7 billion, 58 billion dispersed in multiple COVID-19 EIDLs to applicants using the same IP addresses, email addresses, bank accounts, or businesses listed at the same addresses.
Okay. Again, definitely a red flag for some of those things. Mm-hmm. But again, I run multiple businesses and I applied for PPP loans for both of them, likely from the same email address for the two businesses. So I can see where that would raise some eyebrows. I think that's a red flag, needs to be looking more, but I could also see where that's legitimate in some cases, which is probably why they dispersed it, because they said it's a red flag. We're not going to look into it because we just need to get money to people who are hurting. So right. I get it. I get the hesitancy, but I don't know if it's necessarily for sure means that there's nefarious players at work.
Okay. Finally, $1.1 billion in COVID-19 EIDLs and emergency advance grants to potentially ineligible businesses.
Okay. I have nothing to say with that.
Okay.
Because again, if they know they're potentially ineligible businesses and they just decide to give them the grants, they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And they're just trying to help, because potentially a lot of those are eligible businesses, so get them the money.
Right. Just one little bit of thing to put this all in context. Remember we said 169 billion in EIDL loans were made. Just to give you an idea, and it was over 3 million loans that were made. For Hurricanes Katrina, Rita, and Wilma, the SBA approved just over 160,000 loans for a total of $11 billion.
Okay. Although, yeah, I mean, and again, because we're talking everyone in all 50 states was declared to be in a disaster zone, whereas the hurricanes are very localized, so
concentrated. Yes.
Yeah. So it does make sense, but yeah, but also shows you the scope of what we were dealing with coronavirus. So.
Yeah, and the fact that the SBA really wasn't built to handle this kind of scale.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. The report includes a section on inaccurate and incomplete data, which is very interesting. I read through it.
Yeah.
This includes a table of, quote, vague borrower names, which noted 1,148 loans made to borrowers named Uber and 342 called N/A, NA.
Right.
So
for their name, that's
for their name.
That's weird. Yeah.
Yes. There were also nearly 250,000 approved loans that didn't have bank information at all. Fortunately, only 136 of those were dispersed. So
right.
not
Even
bad.
there, you kind of, well, I mean, I guess they could cut a check and send it to an address, but
right.
yeah, it seemed like the whole thing was, well, and again, maybe I'm thinking more of the PPP loan, but you had to apply for a PPP loan through your bank. So bank information was pretty much right there. But yeah, also weird, out of 250,000, only 136 with no bank information got the money. So
yeah,
it was a very, very small percentage.
Okay. Shortly after all that, the report notes, quote, SBA management disagreed with the audit findings we report here. It went on to say, quote, overall management stated it disagreed with the findings because there were insufficient evidence that loans were approved and dispersed to ineligible businesses. But despite this, the agency is taking corrective actions to fully implement our recommendations.
So Caleb, let's get into a couple of cases now, shall we?
Absolutely.
Nice. In July 2020, a gentleman named Vinath Odemsine of Dublin, Georgia, applied for an EIDL loan for an entertainment services business that he had with 10 employees and gross revenues of $235,000 a year. And on August 4th of 2020, the SBA deposited $85,000 into Vinath's bank account. Then in January 2021, Vinath spent $57,789 of that money on, and it's like hard to even say it out loud. He spent over almost $58,000 on a Pokemon trading card is what he did. Awesome. Business expense for an entertainment company, that's a stretch.
Maybe.
Any Pokemon trading card for $58,000? No. What, Vinath? No. And then you might be asking which card. I'm not asking which card because it doesn't matter what card. You're $58,000. No, but you might be saying, so which Pokemon card was it? And I'll tell you which card it was. According to the New York Times, it was a first edition Charizard.
Charizard?
Charizard. Chorizo. I think it's a chorizo.
It's a chorizo.
I think it's a spicy Mexican sausage card. No, it's Charizard, which was released in 1999, and Charizard is this dragon-like Pokemon creature. So the assistant U.S. attorney in Georgia stated the painfully obvious to the New York Times, quote, I would say a Pokemon card is quite a novel scenario. Xavier A. Cunningham, an assistant U.S. attorney in the Southern District of Georgia, said on Tuesday, quote, we don't inherently know what the market is for these cards. We had to hustle to find someone to give us a valuation for it. And the valuation is going to be a lot less than $58,000 damn dollars. The best part of this article is the collector/expert that they spoke to, who totally slammed Vinath's purchase. So again, this is from that article. Charlie Herlocker, a Pokemon card expert and dealer, which also, just pause, I hate it. I hate that someone is a Pokemon card expert even more than I hate that there are people whose job is influencer or life coach. The fact that someone puts on their tax return under occupation Pokemon card expert, that just reflects A, how old I am, and B, how irritable I can be at times. But anyways,
but please, Greg, please proceed, because I'm enjoying irritated Greg. So please. Mr.
Herlocker, this purported Pokemon card expert, said that even if the card's purchase had been legitimate, it was an ill-advised one on Mr. Odemsine's part. Quote, He was buying at the peak of the market, Mr. Herlocker said. It was a terrible short-term purchase. Nobody was willing to pay more than him. Mr. Herlocker said first edition base sets of the Charizard cards are especially coveted if they are in pristine condition, the highest grade that the card can get. Cards graded 9 or 9.5 are more readily available than those with a grade of 10, like the one that Mr. Herlocker said he bought for $220,000. Still ridiculous. He noted that a card with that grade was sold for $336,000 on March 4th by Heritage Auction, a sum that included the buyer's premium. So again, he's saying that there's Charizard cards that are worth way more than even what Odom Signs spent on his, but they were, I guess, better.
Pristine.
But yeah,
Greg.
they
were
nobody, no fingerprint. All I can think of is comic book guy from The Simpsons now on this. Herlocker goes on to say, this is the most desirable card in the hobby, but the federal government could have a hard time right now recouping the amount that Mr. Odomside paid for the card, according to Mr. Herlocker. Quote, if they hired me as a professional consultant, he said, my advice would be to hold out, which I think what he means is don't sell the card right now, wait for inflation and scarcity to catch up with the incredibly high price that Mr. Odomsign paid for his card.
I have to say, but it probably sounded more like, this is the most desirable card in the hobby. If they hired me as a professional consultant, my advice would be to hold out. Like, that's my best comic book guy. I don't know if that's any good.
That was good.
Like,
Most desirable card ever.
No, you may not have this pristine Charizard. No, you may not. It belongs to me. So that. Imagine
that was solid. Yeah, nice. I'm impressed.
But that like, if Charlie Herlocker, if you're listening, Charlie, we're sorry. Okay, you have a very strange job, but you have to admit,
you're a real life comic book guy.
You might be a comic book guy.
You
from The
absolutely
Simpsons.
are a real life comic book guy. But also think about this from the other perspective. Poor Vinath Odomsign. I mean, he was the perpetrator, but he gets some sympathy from us, because not only did he spend his idle loot in one of the nerdiest ways possible, he then got roasted by the nerdiest guy possible in the New York Times in front of the whole world.
Yeah.
So you did an idiot thing and were destroyed by the person who got bullied by everyone in middle school. So
Yep.
it's just, which I guess is a little bit of poetic justice. So to round out the story, in October 2021, Vinath Odomsign pled guilty to 1 count of wire fraud. He was sentenced to 36 months in prison and also ordered to pay $85,000 in restitution. I believe that I looked into this. He was also, so it was $85,000 in restitution plus a $10,000 fine on top of that. And according to federal prison records, he's serving his time in Atlanta RRM and is scheduled to be released in February 2024. So you're almost done there, Vinath. Just hold on.
Greg, when I say the state of Florida, what comes to mind for you?
The things that come to mind to me are Don't Say Gay, illegal drag shows, and alligators riding jet skis while smoking meth. Those are kind of the 3 top ones.
Yeah, and Mickey Mouse.
Okay.
Or not.
If you said Orlando, for sure, but
I
Florida
see.
in general, yeah, I don't know.
Florida's so. Here's the point. Florida has kind of a reputation.
What?
Yeah. There's a reason that I guess Florida Man,
Yeah.
has its own Wikipedia page.
Yep.
It's in the show notes. A very thorough researcher.
Yeah. Not surprising to me at all.
That Wikipedia page says that Florida Man originated as an internet meme in 2013. However, I found an Onion article from 2007 entitled, quote, Florida Man beats out heart disease as nation's #1 killer. And I'm pretty sure that's where the legendary scourge of Florida Man really began.
I'll tell you, I'm a religious watcher of The Daily Show, and they had a wonderful segment about Florida Man and why Florida Man is a thing. And apparently it all relates back to Florida having somewhat unique laws in terms of being able to, of how the courts can publicize the crimes of the people in their state. So there's something about just a little bit more transparency or earlier transparency of what criminals did in Florida than elsewhere that at least contributes to the myth of the Florida Man.
Yes. And just a little bit more fun context. In part of the research I did, I read something that said Florida is currently, we're recording this in 2023, is the 3rd most populous state in the country. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Of course.
The majority of the people currently living in Florida have moved there in the last 75 years. So like the population boom in Florida over the last 6 or 7 decades has been like bananas.
Yeah.
And so like you have all these people moving to this place. It has these kind of, Florida is known for, like you say, it has these weird laws and kind of libertine attitudes in certain parts of the state. And so like it's kind of a madhouse down there. And so that also kind of plays into it.
Yep.
Anyway, our next story fits in perfectly. And it concerns Joseph Harding of Williston, Florida. And Williston is about 30 minutes south of Gainesville, which is in north central Florida, if you care to be kind of geographically oriented.
Yeah. Now,
we always make this kind of caveat. Our geography is for shit, particularly Texas geography.
Bad. Yeah.
So if you care to verify,
look it up for yourself.
Yeah. Our feelings aren't going to be hurt, but that's where this is going on.
Not at all. Right.
Joe,
it's not a geography podcast, but it's weird that geography plays its way into every single podcast.
Seems to. Yeah, seems to. Yep. Anyway, Joe Harding studied construction management at the College of Central Florida and at Florida International University, although he did not earn a degree. No judgment?
Guy.
No judgment?
Yep. No judgment?
Or judgment?
Okay.
No, judgment? Judgment. Judgment, I guess. He worked as a project manager in construction and founded a landscaping company in 2018. Okay. In 2020, Joe Harding of Williston, Florida, won a seat in the Florida House of Representatives, quote, on a conservative message, representing the 22nd district as a Republican.
Yeah, and again, just with Florida's reputation, a particularly conservative message in Florida just seems like he's got to be like a, what was it, the Westboro Baptist? Was he on the board of West? That's like what comes to mind with someone in Florida claiming a particularly conservative message.
Yeah. I think a Florida conservative message will probably resonate with those Westboro Baptist Looney Tunes, but those particular Looney Tunes are they're Kansas. They're in Kansas.
Oh, they're in Kansas?
They are in Kansas.
Oh, okay. Yes. I thought they were in Florida. Again, I mean,
probably they travel well. Because of they travel well.
It might just be because of Florida's reputation. I go, they're crazy. They're from Florida.
Yeah.
So yeah.
See, reputation.
That's exactly.
Anyway, Joe quickly made a name for himself, not only in Florida, not just in Florida politics, but nationally. And I'm going to tell you why. In 2021, he introduced the Parental Rights in Education Bill, which was commonly referred to in the media as the Don't Say Gay Bill.
That was one of my 3 that I thought of with Florida.
Yeah.
I win. Ding, 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 ding. I just won Family Feud. Thank you.
Right.
It's an honor.
So, for those not familiar, there was a provision in this legislation that gained a lot of attention because it prohibited Florida teachers from discussing LGBTQ-related topics in kindergarten through 3rd grade, among other provisions that targeted LGBTQ children and their families. So
this guy was the mastermind of all of that.
Yes, he was the original sponsor of the bill. In 2022, Harding even introduced an amendment to that bill that would out gay kids to their parents within 6 weeks of the school's learning that the child was not heterosexual. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't have much to say.
Yeah, that's
Both the bill, the original bill, and this amendment got a lot of national attention. Most of it negative, as you would hopefully imagine.
right. As you can feel from the two hosts of this podcast.
Yeah. For what it's worth, the outing amendment was eventually withdrawn. So,
which is nice to hear. I actually did not know that. I heard about the outing part of it. I did not hear that was withdrawn. So that's actually some good news, in my opinion.
Yeah, they managed to yank that bit.
Nice.
Anyway, so that's a bit about Joe Harding. Look, let's be honest here. He's a top seller at the jerk store. This guy.
Yeah.
Seriously, take a look at this guy if you got a chance. There's plenty of stuff in the show notes. I'm pretty sure he's the original prototype for the 1980s jock villain.
Absolutely.
He's a scowling five-head in some of those pictures.
Yeah.
He looks like he was voted most likely to drive angry in high school.
Right. Like he has a resting Second Amendment face.
Yeah. If you Google who should women avoid at the bar at all costs, his photo comes up.
He looks like he's cosplaying someone who was rejected from military enlistment.
This guy decided to use his political position to join a stupid culture war against queer folks instead of doing anything remotely useful whatsoever.
Right.
So here we are.
Here we go.
Despite this widespread national backlash, the original bill passed both the Republican-controlled Florida House and Senate and was signed into law by Florida Governor Meatball. It was signed into law by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis in March 2020. Since we discussed tornadoes at the top of the show, I'll just make one note that after this bill was signed into law, a tornado damaged Joe Harding's house in Ocala, Florida. And as you might expect, people took that as a sign. All right. I think we've been enjoying ourselves a little too much.
Possibly.
Anyway, despite a tornado hitting Joe Harding's house, which, for what it's worth, he wasn't home, but his family was. And, his family
everybody's
isn't
okay.
Everybody's fine.
Okay.
Everybody's fine.
Good.
He's got young kids. The kids are fine.
Okay.
So, good. But there is actually a much more satisfying silver lining to this story. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. That silver lining is that on December 7th, 2022, a federal grand jury returned a 6-count indictment against Joe Harding for wire fraud, money laundering, and making false statements to the Small Business Administration related to an economic injury disaster loan.
Nice.
God.
For the tornado specifically?
No.
Okay.
Okay. No. Well, I'll get into it. The Department of Justice press release stated that between December 1st, 2020 and March 1st, 2021, Harding committed 2 acts of wire fraud by participating in a scheme to defraud the Small Business Administration and for obtaining coronavirus-related small business loans by a means of materially false and fraudulent pretenses, representations, and promises, and for the purpose of executing such scheme caused wire communications to be transmitted in interstate commerce. Okay?
Wire fraud.
Our favorite. The indictment also alleged that he, quote, made and caused to be made false and fraudulent SBA economic injury disaster loan applications and made false representations in supporting loan documentation in the names of dormant business entities submitted to the SBA. The indictment further alleges that Harding obtained fraudulently created bank statements for one of the dormant business entities, which were used as supporting documentation for one of his fraudulent EIDL loan applications. By this conduct, the indictment alleges that Harding fraudulently obtained and attempted to obtain more than $150,000 in funds from the SBA to which he was not entitled.
Nice. So he went hard in the paint on this by making
fake bank statements.
Fake bank statements. Yeah, that's big time. Yeah.
So,
a
little bit more detail from a New York Times story. Harding applied for EIDL for 2 entities, one called Vac Shack, I don't know, and 2 Harding Farms.
Right.
He claimed that they were...
Vac Shack specializes in Dyson vacuums. It's really the one-stop shop if you need any kind of suction device.
Oh. And in Florida, that sounds about right.
Right.
He claimed that they were active businesses in 2019 and 2020 with about $800,000 in revenue and 6 employees between them. But the businesses had not, in fact, been active since 2017. He had only attempted to reinstate them in the days leading up to his applications for the loans. So, yeah, that's not going to work, pal.
No.
These as for those phony bank statements, he knowingly obtained fraudulently created bank statements for September and October 2020 for the Harding Farms business.
Right.
At the time of the indictment, at the time of the indictment, Harding said, quote, "I want the public and my constituents to know that I fully repaid the loan and cooperated with the investigators as requested."
Oh.
They had to request, Joe.
Right. Exactly.
They had to request. So here's one of my favorite parts of this story. As I said earlier, he was indicted on December 7th, 2022. Okay?
Uh-huh.
And then he resigned from his seat in the Florida House on December 8th, 2022. So
how long apart was that?
The next day.
That's one day. Yeah.
That's one day.
Exactly one day.
But this is the part I love. According to the DOJ press release, he began his scheme on December 1st, 2020. Okay?
Uh-huh.
He was elected to the Florida House of Representatives on November 3rd, 2020.
Okay.
So he waited 28 days before he decided to become a corrupt politician.
That's 4 weeks. 4 weeks in. Yeah.
Really held out.
Power corrupts in 1 lunar month.
Yeah. one cycle of the moon before he abused the power of his office.
Right.
Anyway, one last thing. Again, this story is full of them. Joe's brother-in-law, guy by the name of Patrick Parker Walsh, also of Williston, Florida, also had a little run-in with COVID-19 relief.
No kidding.
Relief aid fraud. Yep. Patrick Parker Walsh, which, yeah, I'm going to say all 3 names every time.
Right.
Patrick Parker Walsh was the CEO of AirSign Airship Group, which is a blimp company.
Okay.
Yep. A blimp company.
All right.
Those things come from somewhere.
Apparently from AirSign Airship Group.
Anyway, Patrick Parker Walsh submitted 16 falsified Paycheck Protection Program applications for nearly $12 million. He obtained only about 5 for what it's worth. He also submitted a total
only $5 million of ill-gotten PPP.
Less than half
money. Yeah, geez.
Really?
Yeah.
He also submitted a total of 18 fraudulent applications to the SBA for the EIDL, which we've been talking about, for $2.8 million that were fully approved and dispersed.
Oh, okay.
So we got about $8 million, almost $8 million in total. Patrick Parker Walsh's lawyer claimed that he took the loans out to save his business and also added, quote, "His business skills are not the greatest. He took out high-interest loans and made some dumb choices." End of quote. Which, for a defense attorney, that is refreshingly honest.
Right. I wonder how that's part of like the defense strategy. It's like, you can't. This guy's so stupid. I mean, come on. Of course, he's not going to understand what the Paycheck Protection Program is or the EIDL. I mean, it's complicated, right? And
Your Honor,
he reads it at a 7th grade level at best. How is he supposed to know what the fuck these are all about? I rest my case.
Lionel Hutz,
Yes.
since we're dropping Simpsons characters
Exactly.
in this episode, apparently.
Yep.
Anyway, Patrick Parker Walsh pled guilty and was sentenced to 66 months in federal prison in January 2023. But I haven't forgotten about Joe Harding. Joe Harding, on March 21st, 2023, pled guilty to wire fraud, money laundering, and making false statements. He faces a maximum of 35 years in prison. I will be floored if he actually gets that.
Right.
As of this recording, he is scheduled for sentencing on July 25th, 2023. So we'll see. So, Greg, did we learn anything?
Caleb, unfortunately, what I'm learning is I'm getting with all these podcasts we do about pandemic era frauds. It's a masterclass in how to defraud the federal government, and that actually kind of bums me out, like legitimately does, because again, and we've talked about this in other podcasts, where I remember in the craziness and just the anxiety of the pandemic while it was happening, and being an accountant and going, how do I comply with all these constantly changing rules? And you're just going for compliance, and you go, okay, there's a whole nother set of people out there that it seems like they're just waiting for some horrible thing to happen to the country or to their area, and they're just ready to just like slide in and take advantage of it to their own, for their own ill-gotten gain.
Yep.
And the masterclass seems like it's this, where, I mean, I guess the steps are, wait for a massive disaster, and then because what we're looking at is the people who got caught. But one of the things that's apparent to me as we dig through the numbers and we dig through what's happening, we look at the Inspector General reports and things like that, is we go, there's a whole lot of, we're looking at the people that got caught. There are a ton of people that did not get caught.
Yeah.
And so again, the game plan, wait for that natural disaster, and then just commit significantly less fraud than what's possible. And if you do that, you just got some free money, buckaroo.
Yeah. You might be able to afford a condo, like I said, on the Big Island in Hawaii.
Jesus. Please, Caleb, don't insinuate that was from my PPP loans. It was not at all. Jeez. So basically I'm saying that I guess if you look at the pandemic era fraud, kind of the subset of our podcast that focus on those, it really does kind of, our podcast bums me out from that perspective. Shit. It does. But again, I mean, I don't want to just have like this negative view on the world that everybody out there's a bad person. There's also a lot of just stupid people, bad people and stupid people. Here's what I mean by that. With this podcast specifically, we're talking about the EIDL loans. One of the things that I remember that I verified in preparation for this podcast is that EIDL loans, they did not have, there was no possibility of forgiveness for EIDL loans. It's legitimately just a loan. You have to just pay back this money. And I remember
generous terms for what it's worth.
Very generous terms, because it's a very low interest rate. The maximum interest rate that a EIDL loan can have is 4%, which is a great interest rate, especially at the time of this recording. It's a screaming interest rate. And when we look back, I even look back at the loans during the pandemic, and I want to say that none of those loans even hit 4%. They were more like 3.75. And I think for some, maybe for nonprofits, they were 2.75, something like that. It was very, very great loans. Like I mentioned before, the EIDL loans they had, it was about 12 months after they dispersed the funds when you actually had to start repaying the funds. And it's a 30-year term on those loans. So it's a very long, so your payments are going to be pretty small just because of the term of the loan, not to mention the very favorable interest rate. But that said, it's still a loan. Okay, there's the $10,000 part that's a grant. That doesn't have to be repaid. But even like you said, if you really look at it, the average amount was more like $3,500 rather than $10,000. So the vast majority of this EIDL stuff was just loans that you had to repay. So what we're talking about with EIDL fraud is we're talking about loan fraud, and loan fraud is arguably one of the stupidest kinds of fraud, because you're not getting money, you're just getting a fucking loan that you have to repay, and which again goes back to because I made sure to put like underscore when we were talking about my guy Vinath Odom, because his restitution was $85,000. His loan was $85,000. His restitution equaled his loan, which basically meant, hey, you know that loan we gave you? You got to pay it back. Well, no shit. That's what a fucking loan is. So Justice served? I don't know. Which is why it was very important to me to see that they also fined him $10,000 on top of that, because otherwise there's no punishment there. He just got $85,000 that maybe he wasn't supposed to have the right credit to receive that, and he used it on a stupid Charizard card. But regardless.
He did get roasted by comic book guy in the New York Times.
Which is justice, as we said before. There's a little bit of justice there. But even with that, you go, okay, you got to repay $85,000 of restitution, but we know enough about how restitution works to know that the feds confiscated his Charizard card, and whatever proceeds they got from that, clearly it wasn't going to be the $58,000 that knucklehead paid for it, but they got something for it, and that would go against the restitution that he had to repay to the government. So again, just the other thing that we're learning is if you're going to commit fraud, don't commit loan fraud. It's the stupidest kind of fraud. Is that what we're trying to promote on the podcast? Is what kinds of fraud are the best kinds of fraud to perpetrate? And are we trying to teach people how to defraud the federal government and get away with it? No, we're not. But which is why I'm so bummed out by these podcasts, because that's all that it seems like I'm learning from these kind of frauds.
I don't know if I have anything to add other than we've talked about it in several episodes, which is the government's between a rock and the hard place. It either helps its citizens or it makes perfect the enemy of the just fine, and people and more people suffer. And they just kind of like, they hope that the law enforcement will catch enough bad guys that they can get their names in the paper just enough,
right?
But
or at least so that, I guess the way I'd spin that is that there'd be enough press of people getting in trouble for abusing it that it might make people pause before they engage in the similar type of fraud in a future disaster.
Yeah, I mean, because I have to say, it's funny. I think we mentioned it. I think it was in the second PPP episode, which is episode 34, I believe. And like in that episode, and even in this one, the sentences that were getting handed down to these people, kind of long. Yeah, like they are.
Yeah, that's
there
true.
Was a couple. There was one in the PPP episode where the guy got like 11 years.
Yeah. The fact that Joe Harding could get 35 years, I mean, like you said, he's not going to get anywhere near that.
He's not going to get that.
Even if he got a quarter of that, that's a pretty long time, especially with him saying he paid back the loan.
Right.
That's right. So that, I hear that.
His brother-in-law here, who kind of went for it. He got 66 months. I mean, he probably won't serve the whole sentence. That's something else we've learned over the course of doing this podcast.
Right.
Is you can chip away at those things, but still, even if he serves half of it, not great. I mean, I personally don't want to give up 3 years of my life to be in a minimum security prison.
Right. But it's interesting what you said, because doing this podcast, I've learned so much. You remember when we interviewed Nathan Muller, the AIG fraudster, and he was telling us about the whole ING thing. He was telling us how the restitution process worked.
Yep.
And he was like, there's a maximum percentage that they can garnish from your wages. They can't take everything, because you still got to be able to live as a member of society.
Yep.
And then there's a specific date after which, if you haven't repaid your restitution, you're just off the hook.
Yep.
So again, when you look at my guy, Vinath Odamsine, and you think of that, you go, oh, well, having to pay restitution, he might not actually have to pay back his entire loan. So it's almost like, just keep the terms of the loan, and that's a better punishment than the actual punishment that he received from doing the crime.
Right.
And anyways, it's
Nathan Muller, episode 28.
That's a great one. If you haven't listened to that
episode.
one, it's fantastic.
Anyway,
Well, that's it for this episode. And remember, don't spend your ill-gotten gain on nerd loot unless you have unimpeachable nerd credentials.
And also remember to think twice about passing anti-LGBTQ legislation, because if you do, they're going to drop a tornado on your house.
That right on your living room. If you want to drop us a line to communicate your thoughts about this podcast, please send. We'd love to hear from you. And so send us an email at ohmyfraud@earmarkcpe.com. We love getting those. And if you've got a case that you know of, we get great tips on some amazing cases that we've done on the podcast. So if you've got a favorite fraud, let us know what that is too. We'd love to put it in our list of future episodes. Caleb, if people want to find you specifically out there in the internet, where can they get a hold of you?
I'm on Twitter at @CNewquist and LinkedIn /Caleb Newquist. Greg, are you on the internet?
I am, but it seems like less and less nowadays. Don't even try to engage me on Twitter because I haven't been on there in months. But I do go on LinkedIn much more recently, and I'm just /Greg Kyte. I'm Greg Kyte CPA specifically. If you're looking for me, find the bald guy with glasses and a beard, and that's me.
Oh My Fraud is written by Greg Kyte and myself. Our producer is Zach Frank. If you like the show, leave a rating, leave us a review, share it with a friend. All of those things help people find the show, and we want people to find the show. You want people to find the show, so you can talk about it with those people.
And different people who rate podcasts, they love our show, and they're always like, I can't believe these guys only have 47 reviews or whatever we have. So help us become a more legitimate podcast by leaving us a review. It's a free podcast. You just got free CPE for it. You got a second to go do that for us. It's not busy season. Come on, give us a hand.
And while you're at it, subscribe on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get podcasts. And as Greg mentioned, if you're an accountant and you need CPE, if you listen on Earmark, you can get CPE. So, little bonus for the accountants out there.
I have got so much CPE, and I love it so hard. Thank you, Earmark, for helping me maintain my CPE license.
CPA license?
CPA license.
Join us next time for more avarice swindlers and scams from stories that will make you say, oh my
fraud.